So we're going to go over to Marvel. And most people who know me would think I want to talk about the MCU because Endgame's the greatest movie ever made, and I love Kevin Feige, and I have all these reasons, but I am not going with the MCU today. I actually want to talk about something that I've been holding off on for a while, mainly just because I wanted to process it and internalize it and take it in and my experience with it, and I also just didn't really have enough time to talk about it because there was so much going on last summer when we were starting up this show. So to correlate everything together, New Mutants, the final official X-Men film in the X-Men film franchise, has been announced to be coming out on August 28th in theaters. And I want to just take a brief look at some other superhero films with maybe middle to low expectations, which I think everyone can agree is kind of the bar that we're setting with New Mutants. For those that do know me, I can defend almost any superhero movie, not completely, some better than others, but there are points in even the bad superhero movies that most consider bad that I can defend. I'm not saying that every superhero movie is great, some definitely aren't, but I can cut a little slack for some in certain aspects.
I think that's at least partially due to your love for the Power Rangers.
It was good, damn it. And we will talk about this at Power Rangers Week. Wait till August. So for one example is Green Lantern, the Ryan Reynolds movie. The movie is overall empty. You're not going to change my mind on that, but the casting choices of Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan and Mark Strong as Sinestro, I thought were good.
I don't think you can cast Ryan Reynolds as anything and have it be a bad decision.
That's what I'm saying. Like it was the right casting. I knew it back in 2011. Like it was good. There was a lot of potential. I was definitely more excited for a sequel based on the post-credits scene where Sinestro becomes a Yellow Lantern. And they really should have just stuck with the other colors in the film rather than fight Parallax the puffy dirt cloud. That would have made more sense to do. Overall, I actually thought the Green Lantern home planet, Oa, and I thought the Green Lantern effects did look good. It felt like a Green Lantern movie. But you had the other lanterns in there, and they were all cool, and you couldn't really play with them as much. They just chose the wrong villain. You shouldn't have had Parallax. It should have been Sinestro. You can't really get over that hump. But there are certain parts of that I thought could have had potential if they decided to go to a sequel. Do I recommend it? Not really, but there's certain points. Another example, Fantastic Four from 2015, or Fan-Four-Sick, as some of us call it. It was absolutely bland and boring, way more than Green Lantern. But it was at least attempting to be different by being somewhat of a superhero sci-fi horror flick, which is kind of what New Mutants is going to be, but it's just more focused on the horror. It failed mostly at that, and your villain shouldn't be declared and then show up 75 minutes into your script. That just doesn't work. But I saw the relationships that Josh Trank, the director, was trying to do. They were trying to establish with the Fantastic Four and Victor Von Doom throughout the film. I see what they were trying to do. It was just honestly too grounded for what they wanted to do.
And I think it wasn't a lot of that due to some extremely heavy-handed editing and some
editing, reshoots,
late decisions in story writing. It seems like they were trying to tell a story, and that got changed quite significantly. So
there was a lot of laying the groundwork with the established relationship between all five heroes, and right. I think there was just kind of too much time and attention to that, trying to build that up, and it was just.
They didn't even use, I think there was stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor that would have helped fill in a lot of gaps there. And so that whole
I just think they spent too much time focusing on it. It was just kind of too dark for Marvel's first family.
Too dark and too bland and like soap opera-ish.
I just never thought they were a great movie franchise on their own, personally, unless you include other Marvel characters in there. I mean, certainly Doom needed to be the villain for that. I mean, it's Doctor Doom, but that's just because their rogues gallery kind of sucks otherwise, in my opinion.
I always forget that you're so villain centric.
It matters
because I think it does matter. You're right.
Look at Dark Knight. It matters.
When I think about the Fantastic Four, I think they seem like a really strong main character, as it were. They're
a main ensemble.
But you're right. When it comes to the villains, which is 50% of the deal, they're lacking a
I
little.
mean, Wizard is okay-ish. You can rewrite him to make him interesting, but he's still a C-list villain as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if they had the rights to Super Skrull because of Marvel and Disney, but that's, to me, prime Fantastic Four villain, so I'm willing to forgive that a little bit.
Silver Surfer's pretty cool.
Yeah, but they probably didn't want to use Silver Surfer because of the sequel just being not great. And speaking of Silver Surfer, you can't really just throw Galactus in because he's such a big, giant villain. You need to take time to establish who he is. So you're stuck with Doctor Doom, who is arguably one of the best Marvel villains.
Yeah.
Period, but when that's your only one that you can use time and time again, it's like, well, why are we making this movie in the first place? I mean, they had Mole Man in the movie, but then they just killed him off on screen. So that whole plot could have been something. They were stuck, and Fantastic Four. I wrote FF on my script. Final Fantasy 4. No, Fantastic Four. I'm spending way too much time talking about this.
Hopefully it is the final Fantastic
That's
Four.
not even the point. People are wondering why I have Dark Phoenix
we're
behind
talking
me.
Fantastic Four with
I'm
all
talking
these
about
X-Men.
sucky movies that deserve some credit.
And speaking of sucky movies that deserve zero credit.
Oh, just you wait. Dark Phoenix is absolutely different for me, folks.
I haven't seen it, but
It has zero redeeming qualities, and it is, in fact, the worst superhero movie I have ever seen, not just in the modern era, but in general.
boom.
It is a hot piece of garbage. Let me explain why. I've been building this up for almost a year, so I'm going to get it out. I was never so angry coming out of a movie in my life. I didn't have too many expectations, mind you, because of The Last Stand and the fact that it was going to be the last main X-Men film in the franchise, and that was fine. So I knew all this going in, and I was aware of that, but I expected to like something about the movie afterwards. Like one little thing where I'm like, that was cool. Nope.
Nothing.
No. The Last Stand's problem.
I mean, you got just to address that real quick. The casting is kind of good, right? No?
On paper. It's like having a good football team on paper, and then they just blow 8 games in the season.
Yeah. But if you don't consider that, I mean, I'm just looking at these characters behind you, and James, what's his name?
McAvoy?
Yeah, I like James McAvoy. He's great. And your Magneto over there as well. Yeah, there was some good casting.
And they've delivered before.
Right. Just not.
They
now.
did not in this.
Yeah.
The Last Stand's problem was that there were too many plot lines in that movie. You had the Gifted plot line, you also had the Dark Phoenix plot line, and you were just trying to mash it together. And I don't even think our director, I can't remember his name. It's not Bryan Singer, but it was the other guy that took over for Bryan Singer. I don't think he wanted the Gifted plot line, but one of the studio people put it in. That doesn't matter. But the problem, this film's plot line, Dark Phoenix, their problem with the plot is that it blows. It just is not good just on its own. Writer-director Simon Kinberg has been with the franchise since The Last Stand. He co-wrote the movie. And he knows the backlash that came from that movie because the Dark Phoenix story wasn't honored the way that it should. He stayed with the franchise as producer. He eventually wrote Days of Future Past, which is the best X-Men movie, in my opinion, not counting anything from the Wolverine franchise or the Deadpool franchise. Those are separate conversations for another time. But Days of Future Past is my favorite X-Men movie. He wrote Apocalypse, which was so-so, but it was still good in other ways, I think, or at least compared to The Last Stand, for sure. He did co-write and produce Fan Four Stick, so take that as you will. But, I mean, he was there for that backlash, so you'd think that, you learn from your mistakes. That should be the human thing that you do. You learn from your mistakes. It made sense for him to step up into this role of director after Fox didn't want Bryan Singer back because Bryan Singer sucks. The writer would essentially get almost complete control of where the franchise goes next. This guy who's been writing all these films for all this time. It just makes sense to give him that much power. I would put him in that position too. After 10 years, we could finally get this story right on screen. So how do you fundamentally fail as a human to accomplish that after years of wanting to get it right? First of all, stop jumping decades in your movies. To jump into the 60s in one film, the 70s in the next, the 80s in the next, and then land in the 90s, it just feels like absolutely lazy writing. Good Lord. Stop doing it. If you're a screenwriter, please don't do that. It's not good. It especially doesn't look good when Beast over here. When Beast looks age 20, the same that he did in First Class, when he's supposed to be in his 50s in this movie. All of them, Xavier, Mystique, Magneto.
Yeah, they all look so young, especially in this picture.
You're 50. Makes no sense. At least do some green screen age work. My God. Next point. This is like super minor, but you know, as an artiste, this sticks out to me a lot. You had really good, colorful costumes at the end of Apocalypse, you know, with like chromes and shiny blues and reds and all this stuff to make it feel like a real X-Men, or at least
a little more superhero-ish.
Yeah, it really did. Like, and people have been wanting that since the X-Men uniforms from the first movie because they were in all black. And I get why they wanted to do black back then, but now that we're getting more and more better adaptations of comic books, like, let's go for the colorful costumes. And they had it at the end of Apocalypse and was excited to see where it would go. And then they just came out with these yucky yellow uniforms that just, they resemble the original comic look, but they just look like trash on screen. I'm sorry. That was a terrible call to do. You had the good costumes and you went and blew it. So I was really disappointed by that. It was ugly from the jump. But most importantly, you made us sit through, and I say you as Simon Kinberg, you made us sit through a movie on a character that barely got any screen time in the previous movie when she discovers that she has these Phoenix-S powers. If the plan was for Dark Phoenix to be a film story from the get-go, you should have chosen to establish her a long time ago, maybe instead of Mystique for multiple films. We never needed her to be an X-Men. I don't know anyone, at least don't know anybody that ever asked for her to be an X-Men. And we got it. I understand Jennifer Lawrence was getting more popular. I understand.
Say, heavily related to Jennifer Lawrence's
but even
career
so,
curve.
she was still a central focus in X-Men First Class. So it was still part of the plan either way to make her a main character. And it's like, we didn't need her to be, I guess. You set her on a good path in Days of Future Past, and then you wrecked it. You had to showcase Xavier and Magneto and Mystique and Beast because of contracts. And I get that too. But since some of them didn't even want to be there anyway, you should have just moved on from him and just let him go and establish the younger cast, I would think. I mean, spoiler, when Mystique was killed, I felt absolutely nothing for her. And she was in the past 3 movies. And I just like, oh, she's dead. Okay. That's not how I should feel about a character dying, you know? Tony Stark died, and everybody's heart sank. I think they hit the nail in the coffin. Black Widow died, and everybody's heart sank. Yeah, so you also have an awful, in my opinion, antagonistic force who the X-Men are fighting. I think Jessica Chastain was absolutely wasted, and her talents were not utilized. I would argue that the villain should have been Mr. Sinister, who's a great X-Men villain, but maybe they couldn't use him because they wanted to drop him in at the post-credits scene for New Mutants to try and establish that trilogy. He was actually set to be John Hamm, fun fact, and they were ready to film him and have him be Mr. Sinister and be a new X-Men villain, which I thought was great casting.
I would love to see John Hamm as a villain.
Yeah, but that seems like a weak point, though, because how does a main X-Men movie not get priority over what villains they want to use? You know, that makes no sense. How would a studio who doesn't know how to use these characters know which characters need to go where? They wouldn't. Yeah. So it seems like a weak point that you didn't use Mr. Sinister. Maybe you could have used Mojo or Mastermind or Arcade or maybe Omega Red if you were reaching it. But these are all like, you know, villains that are below the level of Magneto. So I understand that you're digging from the bottom of the barrel. But they're still super fascinating, and you could have maybe done more with them. But they would have been far better than the Dabari alien race that Jessica Chastain was representing. It was just so empty and bland. Everyone's performances were below average. Jennifer Lawrence clearly was doing a favor for Simon Kinberg. James McAvoy and Nicholas Hoult definitely seemed checked out from the script, and they were ready to move on to other projects that probably had much better stability and such. The younger cast just couldn't shine at all because the focus was going to the main 4 actors. But the only actor that I felt did give a crap, I will give credit to this. I actually thought Michael Fassbender still delivered as Magneto. Personally, nice. I thought he was still invested, willing to give it as much as he could, and I've always loved and respected him as an actor. So Magneto was my lone favorite character in the movie, but since he wasn't even a central part of it, it was kind of like an afterthought almost, because it's supposed to be about Dark Phoenix. Speaking of, Sophie Turner could have been an excellent Jean Grey, in my opinion, if she was introduced prior. Maybe not changing decades every movie. What a thought. Originally, this movie was supposed to be 2 movies. Supposed to be one where Phoenix is a good guy. You know, Jean Grey gets the Phoenix powers and she's, helping the X-Men save the day makes perfect sense. And then the other being the Dark Phoenix, where Simon Kinberg, quote, wanted to set up and make you fall in love with Jean Grey and then crush you with Dark Phoenix to make you feel betrayed by this character, which I can understand that. Except I don't think that would have worked either. An X-Men story should be an ensemble piece, in my opinion, almost at all times. It's a team. Look at the Avengers. Everyone gets time to shine in all of those movies, and they're always able to interact with each other, and almost no one is the central character, with small, exceptional moments. For example, Tony Stark in Endgame, just as one example that I can point out. To make Jean Grey the lead for 2 whole movies, like 4 hours basically, it would just take away from all the other fascinating characters you have, such as Storm, such as Cyclops, again, such as Nightcrawler, or even reestablishing the Brotherhood of Mutants with like Toad or Blob or Avalanche, and just other characters that you can play with. I understand that the story has multiple parts in the comics, I get that, but you could have just established the Phoenix Force in one movie, fighting against a villain and then elaborating on it further. You tried it in Apocalypse, but then you practically retconned the whole thing when you had her powers come from space rather than just be a part of her inside of you all along. It just doesn't work. I mean, stop taking these characters and rewriting them and retconning everything when you're in the same franchise and in the same continuity. That's not what you do with comics. Yes, sometimes you have company-wide retcons, but you don't need to do it in your movie when you've got control already, especially as the guy who's been involved with this franchise for over 10 years. Now, I understand that the Disney acquisition of Fox probably messed up plans during principal photography and reshoots and post-production. I get that. The studio's goals vastly shifted from what was originally promised to the creative team and the cast and everybody. And they had to work on the fly. I get that. It happens in this business, and I'm mostly forgiving of that in any film situation. As an actor, I do get it. But when this is your second attempt at a story, and you've seen what's worked and what hasn't for your franchise, and you have an untapped pool of heroes and villains to work with, so you're never using the same old material that you really never got to change because you're stuck on Magneto and you're stuck on the same old X-Men all the time, you're not going to get a pass from me this time. I'm not saying Simon Kinberg doesn't deserve to work in Hollywood again. Many a male actor can fail spectacularly and return to come back behind the lens and make something great. Here's looking to you, Shyamalan. But this feels like a special case of what happens when you don't learn a lesson after numerous times. People are supposed to get better after learning from their mistakes. I try this every day while I'm on Earth. When they don't try to get the lesson, you have to shrug it off and walk away for your own mental health. That's just what you have to do. You remember the highs, you take those positive memories, but you accept the lows and you move on. And that's what this X-Men franchise really represents overall. It's not an unsuccessful film franchise. It's made a lot of money. It spawned the modern superhero era. There is no Spider-Man. There is no Avengers. There is no Wonder Woman or many modern DC movies without X-Men 1. It's just clear as day. The proof is in the pudding. I mean, we got Deadpool to where he needed to be so that his character could flourish, and we're all excited for Deadpool 3 whenever that is in the MCU with Ryan Reynolds, thank goodness. And we got Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman became a superstar almost overnight. You
mean Wolverine?
Yeah, same person, right? Code name.
I didn't know anyone was still calling him Hugh Jackman.
Huge Jackman. But, I mean, the franchise can't help but look like an overall failure to me because it ended on such a sour note. Ugh, it just tasted gross. Dark Phoenix is worse than The Last Stand and worse than X-Men Origins. And that blows. Fox and the creatives on this film never learned the lessons from any of those outings and those backlashes, and I'm sure it contributed to the eventual sale of the studio and all of its properties to Disney. New Mutants can either be a standout or a small bump in the road to a major reboot that lies ahead for the characters. I'll see it. I'll review it. It's a shame that this project has been so sidelined for so long. I mean, it was supposed to premiere in April of 2018. And
Wow,
they never
really?
got to do the reshoots because so much time had passed because this was all when the Disney stuff was taking over.
Oh.
So when they were finally able to take a look at it, almost a year after the director had moved on to another project, they couldn't go back for reshoots because everybody aged because they're working with kids. So the 75% that they had,
a bunch of stuff got canned.
yeah,
Wow.
75% of what they shot, assuming the 25% would fill up the space,
Yep.
that's 75 is their 100% for this. Hopefully it can add something positive to the franchise before we move on to a new age of mutants.
Mm-hmm.
I can't hold my breath necessarily, but please just be better than this. Because boy, did we get a bucket of crap. So
are these the costumes at the end of Apocalypse?
yes.
I like
yes,
those.
they are.
I like those.
I love Cyclops' outfit especially.
Very cool.
There's a shine that comes through on camera when you get to the final scene. It's a little dark to see because they're in the down below in the training room, but it looks great. Nightcrawler's outfit looks so spot on. I love it.
Yep.
I love the look that they have for Storm. Jean Grey's a little average, but that's okay. The color scheme is still there based on at least her 90s appearance.
Yes, but with a stylistic, with some stylistic choices that are actually interesting.
Right. I
cool.
like that Beast has armor, but I would have been okay if Nicholas Hoult didn't return, not because he's been a bad Beast by any stretch, but if you wanted to focus on younger characters, there's a character that you could get rid of because he's been there for 3 movies.
Yeah.
And he had a lot to do in Days of Future Past, might I add. So it's not like he hasn't gotten character development. It's a minor thing, the costumes and stuff, but it just went such a long way with me to really feel like, oh, I'm finally getting the comic look of these characters.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to blow it on something trashy.
It's
and ugly.
so weird too that you would take the time to design something like this and then abandon it.
That's what you get for writing decades into all your movies.
Yeah,
It's bad writing.
If I'd been involved in the designing of these costumes, I would have been so mad.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. It was just so many bad choices. Nobody learning the lessons. Like when you have something good, why break it? You had Days of Future Past right there, the best reviewed X-Men movie. I think it made the most money out of all of them.
I really enjoyed that.
And you took it a step backwards with Apocalypse, and then you just stepped on it with a steel-toe boot. The next film. I understand plans change, but at that point, you work with what you got, and you...
It was a fail.
The best way to summarize it is...
F's in the chat for the X-Men franchise.
The best way I can summarize it before we move on and play some dreams is you had a creative team from the studio to the directors to the writers, everyone who were working with these characters who never quite truly understood what they were working with compared to Marvel Studios, where they're all comic book lovers and they've all worked on previous films for Marvel, for various studios and such. They paid attention to the lessons and they know what they have to work with, and they are taking almost entirely comic to screen, making certain adaptations because it works for the medium. These creatives at Fox just never knew what they had to work with, which is such a shame because I grew up in an age where Spider-Man and X-Men were the main Marvel characters, and everyone else was below them.
Oh, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and I say that based on the TV shows and the movies that were coming out. Like
X-Men
they were number one.
X-Men were always the coolest when I was a kid. I mean, and Spider-Man, obviously, but yeah.
And they've just have been so sidelined, mainly because Marvel wanted to push them out of comics so they could eventually get the rights back. That was a whole thing. But I'm as much as the Disney deal scares me, I'm really happy that we're getting new X-Men and Fantastic Four, and we're gonna get it right. I really believe we're gonna get it right.
Wizard Clint's upset at you for bringing up Tony Stark's death.
Spoiler?
No spoiler. It's just like emotionally raw. Okay.
I understand. It's also been a year, but also he's gonna be in Black Widow. like it's announced that at least Robert Downey Jr. I know that we're going back in time for Black Widow when it comes out in November, but he's coming back.
He is.
You'll see him again.
Yeah. Not dead yet in that timeline. At that point in the timeline.
So yeah, that's my. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk, guys. That rant's been building for over a year.
Well, there you go.
You want to play some
got it
dreams?
off your chest? Do you feel better now? You saved the chat from having to watch that and me from having to watch that terrible movie to know that it's terrible. Now we I trust you. I trust you entirely.
Oh,
I don't need to
man.
watch
Like, if
it.
I ever wanted to do an X-Men movie review, if I was like going through all the films, I'd think, oh God, do I have to watch Dark Phoenix? That's how bad it is. At least for me, watching the
Right.
Marvel movies, like, I can get past Incredible Hulk and Thor: The Dark World, and if you want to know more about my overall list rankings of the MCU, feel free to find that video on our YouTube channel.
It's there.
But they're not terrible films. They're average, maybe slightly below average, but they're not terrible. Dark Phoenix is just terrible. X-Men Origins is a below average movie. Last Stand is more below than average, but Dark Phoenix is just the worst.
don't know if
I
I
enjoyed
saw Last
Fantastic
Stand.
Four 2015 more than I did Dark Phoenix. And that got a 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. This got a 23. I enjoyed Fantastic Four more than this, and I really don't care for them.